suckers! I say the future is ours! If you can count, we're gonna rain on you, warriors! Let's bust a move.
I'll take the Warriors all city. There won't be anybody in New York who doesn't know this game.
Don't get ahead of yourself, young blood.
That's right, Warrior. We heard you guys were good. That's why we called you in to help us take down Jones Street.
Who the hell are these dudes? So wake up, Coney, because the Warriors are here to stay.
I'm sick of running from these wimps.
We're gonna take you thugs down hard!
You guys are real tough. Real big shots.
I owe you, Warriors! You think you can take on the Warriors? Can you dig it?
Rockstar Games are easily most well known for the Grand Theft Auto and the Red Dead Redemption series, and maybe it's the inner hipster in me, but it's their less talked about games that I've always seemed to enjoy the most. Manhunt 1 and 2, Bully, and case in point, The Warriors, based off one of the best cult films of all time.
Can you dig it?
In case you haven't seen it, in which case, shame on you, it's simple to sum up. Set in New York City, focusing on the eponymous Coney Island gang who are heading up to the Bronx for a big meeting.
This conclave is going to be a real big item.
They're then framed for the murder of a warlord named Cyrus in the midst of a citywide truce where Cyrus was trying to bring all of the gangs together to overthrow the police. Then stranded 50 to 100 miles from Coney, they've then got to make their way back, avoiding the cops but also every other gang that thinks they're responsible for Cyrus' death. Most importantly being the Gramercy Riffs. Featuring a cast of relatively unknown actors for the time, it's still gone on to become a personal favourite of mine, and I really do think it's one of those movies that is just mandatory viewing. Similar to other films like The Thing, Pulp Fiction, or Army of Darkness, it's a cult masterpiece, and just something that everyone should see at least once in their lives. Despite the main characters being a few out of literally tens of thousands of other gang members, there was just something about the way these guys carried themselves and their presence that made them feel elevated among everyone else. Their journey really did feel like it was on a biblical level, and getting home was the be-all and end-all, the centre of the universe. It's what Doctor Who refers to as a fixed point in time. And if anything should go wrong and these guys don't make it back to Coney Island, well, the entire space-time continuum as we know it would fall apart and explode.
Maybe we ought to talk about this later, huh?
And as it turns out, it became a perfect game for someone like Rockstar to make, which is kind of funny in a way too, because the gang aspects of Grand Theft Auto and the Manhunt games were influenced a lot by this film. But then a lot of the gameplay elements in this feel like they've been taken right out of those other titles too. I mean, you've got the Warriors movie, which inspired GTA and Manhunt. Now you've got the Warriors game, which has mechanics taken out of GTA and Manhunt. I mean, it's kind of weird how it all comes back full circle like that.
I dig.
A lot of the music in this game is taken right out of the films, and the stuff that isn't sounds like it could have been, with deleted tracks that they just didn't end up using. All of the original gang members have been adapted into the game, with most of the movie's actors doing the same voice work. And you can clearly hear the effect that alcohol, cigarettes, and old age have had on these guys' vocal cords over the past few decades.
Hey, maybe we better check out our hangout.
Let's roll.
Still though, the accuracy in which these characters have been carried across onto the PlayStation 2 of all things is just really impressive. Their appearance and their outfits, and even the way that some of them walk and move, just feels so genuine and authentic. Every Rockstar game always has this sense of the game world feeling real and lived in. And just walking down the street in one of the game's many locations and you'll just see how this world oozes with ambience. You can hear sirens going off in the distance, there's dogs barking, people arguing and shouting at each other. It's a level of world building that's seldom seen in video games from that same time period. And it's just something that Rockstar are absolute masters at. Even though the Warriors was pretty gritty in the film, and kind of still is to some extent here, Rockstar still couldn't help adding in their own trademark element of wackiness to certain characters, with these larger-than-life personalities and exaggerated performances.
Let us go!
Shut the fuck up, bitch! Let's bust a move.
Despite being a movie tie-in though, this is really an origin story more than anything else. It explores the backstory to a lot of the gang members before the events in the film. It shows the Warriors rising from a lowly gang that no one really takes all that seriously to them then taking out their local rivals, which kind of earns them that invite to the big meetup in the Bronx.
Oh shit, my leg!
And everybody says that Cyrus is the one and only. Well, now the Warriors can go and see for themselves.
I think we better go have a look for ourselves.
And I think the Warriors truly shines when it's recreating some of the scenes from the film. The cinematic recreating Cyrus's big speech is almost beat for beat, down to the little reaction cutaways of random gang members in the crowd. You've got that awesome opening sequence where they're all riding on the subway, which might be one of the best openers in any movie ever. That not only showed off the cool soundtrack, but also effortlessly establishes the personalities of all of these characters. We can see right off the bat that someone like Ajax is a complete hothead who's got a bit of a fondness for getting into random fights, but also laying down a bit of strange wool.
You got a one-track brain, you know that?
Cleon, on the other hand, establishes his alpha dog status. Snow and Swan are shown to be a lot more level-headed, while someone like Rembrandt is shown to be a bit of a lightweight. Not that we really needed to be told that. I mean, just look at him. The guy looks like a 12-year-old with razor stubble.
I dig.
It's actually downright impressive though, just how much effort they put into all of these sequences throughout the game.
You see what you get, Warriors? You see what you get when you mess with the orphans?
You see what you get, Warriors? You see what you get when you mess with the orphans?
I've been asked to relay a request from the Gramercy Riffs.
I've been asked to relay a request from the Gramercy Riffs.
I'll shove that bat up your ass and turn you into a popsicle.
I'll shove that bat up your ass and turn you into a popsicle.
Can you dig it?
And it's all in there, from hauling ass to get away from the baseball furies, to hanging out with the Lizzies. These chicks are packed, man. These chicks are packed.
Shit, the chicks are packed. The chicks are packed.
A lot of the time as well, it also adds in new sequences that weren't even in the film. So the bit when the Warriors are hiding from the Turnbull ACs, there's now a whole new section here in the game where you've got to sneak through their turf undetected, getting into a few fights here and there as you try to escape and find the others who've been separated. Before the bit where you're running to a nearby subway station and narrowly avoid them on the platform.
Those were some desperate dudes. I was weak.
After meeting up with the orphans and watching Mercy stir things up by opening up her giant dick trap, there's now a new section where you've got to avoid the cops, breaking everyone free from handcuffs and escaping to a nearby park. You even get to take part in that epic fight scene against the punks inside that subway station bathroom. And they've extended the end fight against the rogues as well. Sorry, spoilers. Getting up to replaying the missions based off the film though does take a pretty long time. There's 18 main missions all up, and these ones don't start until I think it's mission 14. Honestly though, if the entire game was just these 5 missions, it would have been money well spent. But leave it up to Rockstar to never rest on their laurels, and they've just gone above and beyond here, creating that entirely new backstory about how the Warriors rose to power in Coney Island.
So wake up, Coney, because the Warriors are here to stay.
Playing mostly as Cleon, the gang's leader, showing what happened up until that fateful night where he got awkwardly elbowed to death. At one point or another, you're going to play as all the other gang members too. Cowboy, Rembrandt, Ajax, and my boy Swan. They've even all got their own unique moves and fighting styles. Kinda makes sense too that each gang member is going to be better or worse at certain things. Ajax, Cleon, and Swan are better fighters, while Rembrandt is better at spray painting awkward looking letters on the side of things, just like in the film.
Nice work.
The return of a lot of those iconic gangs in the game is just pure fan service, and the attention to detail in recreating some of their outfits is just awesome. You've got the Moonrunners right next to the Van Cortlandt Rangers, you've got the Rogues, the Baseball Furies, and the Riffs. That's 20,000 hardcore members, 40,000 counting affiliates, that are waiting to fight throughout the game's 18 missions. Outside of the story, this is at heart just a pretty damn solid little beat 'em up, and most of your time's going to be spent stomping on people or punching them in the face. As someone who grew up playing 2D beat 'em ups like Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, As someone who grew up playing 2D beat 'em ups like Golden Axe, Streets of Rage, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a game like this is kind of a natural progression for a young man that's pumped up full of testosterone. Right off the bat, you get one of the best tutorials of all time. That starts off with you beating the crap out of a bunch of hobos. Then the game throws about a dozen different mechanics at you so fast that it's honestly going to make your head spin. But it's really not all that confusing to learn or get the hang of. So you've got a basic and a heavy attack, and you can do 3-hit combos by pressing combinations of both of these. Apart from that, you can grab onto someone and either continue hitting them, throw them, and if you're close to a wall, you can even slam them into it for massive damage. If someone's on the ground, you can either simply stomp on them like in the GTA games, or pin them down and hit them for even more damage. Probably the best move though is where if you're sprinting and then press one of the attack buttons, you launch yourself forward and knock everyone down like they're bowling pins, which seriously never gets old. In fact, I have to say, if you're not starting every fight with this move, well, you're playing the game wrong. You can pick up objects like chairs, trash cans, use weapons like pool cues, a board with a nail in it.
He's got a board with a nail in it.
Machetes or a baseball bat. Shoved up someone's ass so far, you'll turn them into a popsicle. Dish out enough damage and you'll be able to go into a sort of a rage mode, hitting harder for a shorter period of time, and even being able to pull off some really sweet finishing moves that also differ for whoever you're playing as. Off the back of that, it is actually kind of neat to see how each warrior has their own unique fight style and special attacks. Rembrandt, with his so-called artistic skills, can put a spray paint can to use during combat and spray someone in the face, which, again, sounds familiar. Cleon goes all Bruce Lee and jumps down on someone's chest, finishing them off in a single hit. And Swan turns into fucking Bane and just snaps someone in half on his goddamn knee. And nothing ends a fight faster than putting someone in a wheelchair for the rest of their life. Another big component to the combat is the co-op aspect. The scale of these fights can be pretty big at times, often over a dozen dudes in combat at once. And even if you're not playing with a second person, the AI is going to often try to facilitate helping you out. By far the most useful move is where if someone can be grabbed from behind, you can then attack them from the front for a super powerful finishing move. On top of all of this, you've also got the option to play through the entire game with the second player, which is kinda neat in concept but leaves something to be desired in execution. Now, I say this because of the way the screen goes from single to split, depending on the distance each player is from one another, and it kinda makes it very disorienting during combat. Where this does shine though is the Rumble mode, where you can choose to play as any gang in the game or even create your own, then take place in these brawls in various arenas. Just don't pick the Lizzies though, because they suck. Beating the shit out of another gang as Cyrus and then hearing him trash talk at the end of the fight though is definitely one of the greatest things I've seen in a video game in recent memory.
One burrow at a time, brother.
Stay solid.
Your biggest enemy here though is just going to be the game's camera, which has a mind of its own sometimes and is almost a bit of a handicap. During some of the fights, it becomes really hard to even see what's going on. I mean, that is kind of the point though, I guess, and there's not meant to be anything sportsmanlike or fair about any of the fights in this game. If the sight of your fellow warriors stomping on someone while they're on the ground wasn't a dead giveaway.
That's the hard shit right there!
I do think the game would have definitely benefited from a fixed perspective during these fights though, more so than the traditional third-person style camera. But I mean, it works about as well as you could hope for a mid-2000s beat 'em up. I think without a doubt the biggest comparison you could make to the rest of the stuff in this game is to the GTA series, which again kinda makes sense considering who developed this thing. Outside of the main story missions, you've also got a bunch of optional flashbacks, which shows how all of these main members got involved with the gang in the first place. You've got the Warriors Hangout, where you can walk around and see all the guys sitting around and chatting, drinking beer or hanging out downstairs and working out. There's also a point to that too. Do enough pull-ups, push-ups and sit-ups and you can increase your stamina, through a little minigame that turns into a button-mashing battle of attrition as you try to max it out. Leave the Hangout and you can walk around Coney Island, completing even more side missions for extra unlockables, like brass knuckles and steel cap boots to increase the damage you do. Money is an important resource in the game too. There's actually entire sequences in the game where your objective is to just go around looting stuff, instigating fights and creating carnage like it's state of emergency. And then kicking and punching up cars like it's the bonus round in Street Fighter 2. You can smash out car windows and steal the radios inside. You can break or lockpick your way into shops and clear out the shelves for extra cash. Then spend it on spray paint cans or drug dealers for flash. A drug that's the only way to get your health back.
Good choice. I'm telling you, you're gonna flip your lid, man.
And a drug that I'm assuming is supposed to be some kind of combination of bath salts and cocaine. Damn.
Good choice.
If you've run out of cars to jack or shops to break into, you can even mug random NPCs for a few spare bucks. Though most people seem to only carry around pocket change, and mugging is often easier said than done. You've even got a very similar looking radar to the GTA games too, with objective icons popping up on the minimap in your near vicinity. And the areas that you move through from mission to mission really do feel like smaller, cordoned off sections from a larger map. Cause too much of a ruckus during any of this, and you can even have the cops chasing after you, who for some reason are incredibly strong and easily able to overpower you. Actually, as a rule of thumb, every mission involving the cops in this game is often just fucking terrible.
Just shut your mouth, loser.
And the whole premise of beat cops being able to tackle down these coked up 20-something-year-old gangsters is about the dumbest shit ever.
Just shut your mouth, loser.
Look, I get that they had to have some kind of threat in this game, seeing as most of the other rival gangs you beat up drop faster than a bag of dirt. But it should be said that the cops in this game do not mess around, and the ease in which these assholes can pin you to the ground is definitely frustrating.
Asshole.
By far the worst mechanic though, I think, is the spray painting, where you've got to tag a bunch of walls by tracing around a shape using the left thumbstick. If you go outside of the lines too much, you've screwed up and then have to wait a couple of seconds before you can start again. Even worse is when you run out of cans, then have to go and find another one. Yeah, running out of cans, the 4 words that no Australian ever wants to hear.
You're getting pretty good at that.
There's even an entire mission devoted to this mechanic where you've got to run around this mini arena to complete a warrior's tag before 3 other gangs create their own tag, racing to grab cans that spawn on random ledges before the other gangs so you can keep spraying. And let me tell you, this mission was so unfun that it actually almost made me just want to stop playing the game. Gets even worse later when you've got to tag half a dozen different trains in a train yard, whilst also avoiding the police and nearby gang members who keep interrupting you. Oh yeah, and each train requires 3 separate tags to complete, so you've got to do it like 20 times all up. And I think it'd almost be more fun trying to spray paint a bullseye on the butthole of a tiger than do this. Aside from Grand Theft Auto, The Warriors also has some pretty big similarities with Manhunt as well. The whole gangs and faction thing for starters, but the atmosphere and the sound design throughout the game is also very similar, which wasn't by accident considering Manhunt was largely inspired by the film as well. The stealth system though is almost Manhunt's, just lifted verbatim from the game. You hide in dark areas to avoid being seen by enemies. You can throw objects to create noise, distracting and forcing them to leave their patrol route and investigate. Then sneak up behind someone without being seen, and you can even kill them in a single neck-breaking hit. The missions based off the film when you're hiding from certain gangs feels like it could be taken right out of something that James Cash would find himself stuck in. Even down to the way that NPCs are very vocal when patrolling, which is a good way of world building but also making you aware of their positions.
I'm gonna find your ass. You'll see.
The way they goad you into coming out of your hiding place is also very similar to some of the dialogue from the gangs in the Manhunt games too.
Don't tell me you're scared of a couple of bruises.
Seems like every outfit's going soft, man.
Hiding in the shadows is also the only way to get someone to stop chasing you, and thankfully the friendly AI is pretty smart when it comes to making sure they stay hidden. You can even give them orders at any time, which they carry out really quickly.
Stay silent. I don't want to get made.
So it's not an incredibly complex stealth mechanic, but it works well enough and it is consistent, which is all that matters. So right about now you might be wondering why you've never heard of this game and why no one even talks about it that much, considering I've just been basically down on my knees with my tongue up its ass most of the time. Well, let's not mince words here. Despite how solid a lot of these mechanics are, this is still a mid-2000s video game, and that comes with a lot of mid-2000s video game bullshit. The combat, as good and functional as it mostly is, can also be an absolute mess at times. For starters, you don't have really any means of solid crowd control, and if you're surrounded by a bunch of enemies at once, you'll often get your shit kicked in so quickly it'll make your head spin. Being hit by a melee weapon's often always going to knock you on your ass, and it's really frustrating to just have enemies knocking you over constantly, considering you can't really do anything to avoid it a lot of the time. Secondly, most of the boss fights are just terrible. The combat in this thing is at its best when you're fighting just basic dudes, other gang members like the Warriors. They're not superhumans, they're just random guys with the same set of skills as the player. But then they often throw in these boss fights against these comical, larger-than-life characters that almost feel out of place with the rest of the setting. These guys can soak up an insane amount of hits and have attacks that can often do massive damage. Most of these fights just require you to throw bricks or beer bottles at them a couple of dozen times too, and it's about as fun as scratching your asshole with a cactus. The only upside is that they get slightly less worse with each one, so the consolation is that the further you get into the game, the less tedious they become. But then there's some other sequences in the game that are just bad in concept and execution alone. I already mentioned how bad those spray painting bits are, but for one mission, you're trying to escape from an ambush and have to do this by smashing the padlock on a fence with a hammer. This is all whilst rival gang members are constantly throwing Molotov cocktails at you from a nearby rooftop. Sounds fun, doesn't it? The chase sequences in the game are pretty good, but you've just got such a small margin of error during these that if you make a single mistake with a button prompt, you're usually pretty much dead. I think a big part of why some of these suck is often the camera angle, which doesn't show the direction you're running, so you can't even see what's coming ahead, making it just pretty much trial and error. The ones where you can see where you're going are fine and actually kind of awesome, especially the one against the baseball Furies. This whole sequence here still happens to be one of my most favourite parts of the game, and the way these guys are introduced early on is almost like something out of a horror game.
Who the hell were those freaks, man?
I don't know, man, but they were some bad mother dudes, man.
I think most of the other complaints I have towards this thing though can be somewhat justified in the fact that, again, like I said, this is a game from the mid-2000s. I guess my point is that it's not perfect, and it's aged worse than Mickey Rourke, but it is still a really unique and interesting game that doesn't get the recognition I think it deserves anymore. And as much as I hate this word, I really do think it's one of those few games that could really benefit from a remake, along with the Manhunt series and Vice City.
We got one more thing to take care of here.
I think the ultimate reason a lot of people didn't even play this thing back when it first came out was firstly that it was based off a cult film, and I think the major demographic of people into gaming in the mid-2000s probably weren't gigantic fans of it. But also I think that it just happened to come out around the same time as games like Resident Evil 4, God of War and Call of Duty 2. So I don't know, on some level, maybe it was just that classic example of a good game being overshadowed by other, more prominent titles. Well, I don't know, maybe just the fact that it wasn't another Grand Theft Auto game meant that people just didn't really take notice of it. Either way though, I think it's hands down one of the best movie tie-in games of all time.
Warriors!
You've got that high level of content and value seen in pretty much everything Rockstar works on, combined with some bone-crunching combat good enough to give any teenage boy a throbbing heart on. So I guess I've just got one last question for you. Can you dig it?
Can you dig it?